This, this poem is by Wendell Berry. I go among trees and sit still. All my stirring becomes quiet around me like circles on water. My tasks lie in their places where I left them, asleep like cattle. Then what is afraid of me comes and lives for a while in my sight. What it fears in me leaves me, and the fear of me leaves it. It sings, and I hear its song. Then what I am afraid of comes. I live for a while in its sight. What I fear in it leaves it, and the fear of it leaves me. It sings, and I hear its song. After days of labor, mute in my consternation, I sing my song at last. And as I sing it, the day turns, the trees move. After days of labor, mute in my consternation, I hear my song at last, and I sing it. As we sing, the day turns, and the trees move. We come together to sit right in the middle of our lives, together. It's a rare thing for human beings to come and sit quietly together. It would seem that we're very afraid of what we will find if we stop doing. And as all of us who have practiced for any length of time at all know, we will find very difficult things to fear. We will find everything we've been running away from in the human condition will reveal itself over time. But the Buddha's extraordinary discovery was and is that who or what we are is vastly more than the vagaries of the human condition. We can become aware of everything that occurs and recognize that none of it is truly personal. It's an increasing, growing relief as more and more of what we think of as our personality becomes less convincing. So that means that the joys and the depressions and the happiness and sadness and confidence and doubt, and pleasure and pain can continue to come and go as they do. but that we learn to abide in that still place, which is the origin of all activity. So please join me in coming home to the body that sits here, to the breathing, to noticing when the mind wanders, and to do this training in mindfulness and concentration with great kindness and gentleness. We're not here to subdue the mind. We're here to allow it to find its way to peace. Peace through allowing and accepting, relinquishing identification. So one moment at a time, one breath at a time, coming home to breathing in and breathing out, and to sitting here, simply remembering this body sits here is perfect mindfulness. It sits here and it's filled with sensations. It sits here and breathes. please notice if you're trying to change the mind. And notice if this takes tightness in the forehead or somewhere. Awareness is actually effortless. When awareness of the wandering of the mind appears, it's already happened. If you're using the breath as your training object, you can then very gently return to breathing. If you discover that the mind of this moment is colored by or characterized by craving, wanting, desiring, grasping, knowing that is perfect practice. If it's a mind that is disliking or has aversion or hating or striking against whatever is arising, knowing that is perfect practice. If this mind is particularly restless, agitated, worried, planning, remembering, jumping from one thought to another, restless, agitated, to know that is to realize you are not that. To encounter the mind which is dull and sleepy and quite close to unconsciousness, where there's no energy, to know that is to have glimpses that you are not that. That's part of the weather of the mind. To be in doubt. Why am I doing this? Does this work? Can I do this? Why bother anyway? Doubt, despair, dispiritedness. To awaken to that as mental phenomena is also freedom. Freedom from identification with doubt. See if you can relinquish the puritanical and perfectionistic notion that you should somehow silence the mind. It will fall silent sometimes. And that's delicious, pleasant, fleeting, often, and not the goal. The goal is awareness and presence itself. each breath, each thought, each emotion, everything, in fact, has a beginning, a lifetime, and an ending. There's no reason you can't notice this living process, beginning, existing briefly, and then passing. This is a doorway to wisdom. Notice coming and going. In a few moments, the gong will sound. Please do not mistake the gong as the end of meditation. When one understands mindfulness, there is no end of meditation. There's simply the moving on to the next form that life takes. That which is awake, aware, mindful, is capable of doing that in every activity. Mr. Jim, would you do the honors? Jim Dalton is going to lead some mindful movement.
She's doing well.
She's doing fine.
So let's get in touch with our feet on the floor and our upright position. Lift the toes, lift the heels. Feel the juice coming back into the ankles and toes here. And then reach out like on a 45-degree angle and keep your fingers pulled back. There's a opening to the palms, and then squeeze the shoulder blades together and then release. And keep squeezing, not to your ultimate point of strength, but just firmly pulling the shoulder blades together and then releasing. And one more. And then relax the shoulder blades, but keep the fingers out for a second. Sink into the knees. And then release the hands. Bring the hands close together. Then breathe in and open them out. Let the elbows kind of move away from the torso and then come back in with the exhale. So the movement is just riding on the breath. As the breath runs out, the hands slow down and move in a different direction. When we reach that point of being full, the hands slow down at the other end and start a new direction. And we'll sink a little lower and take this ball of energy up and stretch forward a little bit and down on the exhale, feeling the shoulders soften, relax. And one more. Sinking, coming back to the center. Just hold the ball steady for a second. Just feel the effects in your hands and your arms. Maybe your breathing is a little deeper now. Open the palms and face down and press down. Breathe in. Noticing the shoulders again. Fingertips working together with the breath. Breathing in as we come up. And breathing out as we sink. And then we'll start again with the same movement up, but then open to the side. Come back to the center. And sink. So we can breathe in and out. In and out. And we'll start the same way, lifting, opening, but then we'll stretch overhead and start painting a rainbow. Reaching up, we'll separate clouds and sink, crossing the wrists, lifting, turning, separating. Opening to the side, lifting the palms up, bringing one hand in, pushing with the other, turning the wrist, palm up again, and pushing with the palm forward, turning the wrist. Noticing how the whole arm has to cooperate to turn the wrist. It's not just a simple movement, it's pretty complex. And then pulling back and coming overhead, the shoulder has to do a fairly complex dance. Okay, then I'm going to skip forward to my favorite part of the form and splash in the sea. Riding the waves. And opening the arms, making kind of figure eights. And back to the center. We'll step out and splash in the sea over here. And then ride the waves. And open the arms. Okay, coming back to the center, I'm going to turn around because this next set is from the Shibashi 2. It begins similar to the Shibashi 1 where we lift, but instead of sinking right away, we push out and sink. And there's other forms that are easier to explain if we're all going to the same direction. So the opening is just lifting energy out of the earth and circulating around evenly, left and right. And then coming to the center line, we close the palms together and bring the hands up, fingers are down, then forward, fingers are pointing up until we sink again. So there's a tracing a circle right on the center line of the body. And then we'll step out to the right, stretching the right hand and turning to the left. And then back off and turn to the right and lift your right toe. So there's lots going on with these moves. We've got to integrate the right and left side, the weight moving forward, the weight moving back. And the neck is flexible. Let's try it this way. Stepping left, turning right, backing off, lifting the toe. Then coming back to the center, we'll put all our weight on the left leg, relax the right leg, face the palms towards each other, and just do a little treatment for your right leg. Just radiating energy out of your palms, then softening the left leg, back and forth. Okay, then we'll come back to our centered position and lift both hands up so the palms are facing the same way and move to one side. And then come back to the other side like a fisherman throwing his nets off the side of the boat. So it's like casting the nets. feeling the weight shift. Okay, now this is the complicated one, so we don't want to bang into each other too badly here. So if you're touched by someone, consider it a blessing, not an attack. So we're going to swing the arms clockwise, step back with the right foot, and look to our left. How's that going? Switch around and look to the right. So the Spirit shows the way. It's like the Dharma. Enter the Eightfold Path right over there. Or you could try it over there. Now I know you're breathing more heavily. Okay, now this is the stubborn child that won't go on the path. Plants his heel. I don't wanna. I'm sure there's no one here like that. Okay, and then again we'll step backwards, but this is the crane bowing to the moon. So the right foot comes back and we look to the right. And then coming back to the center, I can turn around now because it's symmetrical. We'll just lift the hands along the body, and then the yellow dragon shows its claws. And then we sink. So if you look up Shibashi 2 on YouTube, you'll see that it's a lot more energetic than Form 1. It's a lot easier at the end to come to stillness. It ends with the full lift up and down the center, palms out to the side, and then palms down. And then when we come to stillness, it's very apparent that there's vitality in this standing form. Everything's been stirred up. Lots of oxygen flowing in to the lungs and the brain. Lots of chi flowing up from the earth, circulating through the body wherever it's needed. Last week in my class, I was doing the cloud hands, and I found this red spot in the middle of my palm. So apparently the chi needed to go there. And then 2 days later, it was over here on the other side. You just never know what it's going to do. We open the channels by circulating our limbs through particular forms, and then when we hold still, there's lots of activity continuing. It's there all the time, but now it's very vibrant, very apparent. So we come to the center of awareness where all this activity emerges from, that still point in the center. Hearing, bringing our hands together, feeling grateful that the room is filled with people with the same kind of intentions and focus. Thank you very much.
Jim?
Yes, sir. You want this?
Yeah. Great. Please join me in chanting the refuges. Does anybody need a copy of the music? There should be more at the back. I don't know where they all went. It's pretty easy once you get it. It's kind of a country and western tune. I take refuge in the Buddha, the one who shows me the way in this life. Namo Buddhaya, Namo Buddhaya, Namo Buddhaya. I take refuge in the Dharma, the way of understanding and love. Namo Dharmaya, Namo Dharmaya, Namo Dharmaya. I take refuge in the Sangha, the community of mindful harmony. Namo Sanghaya, Namo Sanghaya, Namo Sanghaya. Yay! Just had fun with the kids. We sang that a couple of times. And the old favorite, you may recognize it. I know an old lady who swallowed a fly. I don't know why she swallowed the fly. Perhaps she'll die. Yes, she will. In the end, she swallows a horse. It's a weird song when you think of it. She swallowed the cow to catch the goat. She swallowed the coat to catch the dog. She swallowed the dog to catch the cat. This is a test of memory still. It's still working. Hi. All the same announcements. We still need clothing for our brothers and sisters who are less fortunate at the moment. Yes. Oh, there's more to say. Good.
Can I just make an announcement
Yeah.
related to that? So I was down there Wednesday and I dropped off. My whole back seat was completely full with stuff. So thank you for everyone that contributed to Transmission Projects. But they said that they are really short of and in need of backpacks. So if anyone has one in their closet that's collecting dust like I did, please think of that and try to bring it in.
Backpacks. Well, I listened to NPR this week, and it was the pleading for financial support week. And this time I was there at the last moment when they said, yes, we did it. So please remember that this nonprofit organization needs your financial support. It really does. You can do it online or here in the bowl. We're seeking a volunteer, one of the key roles in the community actually, to be the volunteer coordinator. And it's a unique position actually, in that the real job of the volunteer coordinator is not to get the jobs done. It's to support and encourage the people who are volunteering to be mindful and have a lovely time while they're doing whatever they do. So it results in lots and lots of connection with the person who plays that role. So, I like to speak to the current circumstance in the culture. And once a year, I take advantage of the moment, this day we call Mother's Day. My wife Jennifer is at home doing exactly what she wants to do today, and our kids and I are taking her out for dinner because what she really wanted for Mother's Day was to have some really significant time alone. Because being a mom is pretty darn consuming. And amazing, of course. But I want to say a few words about my mother. Her name was Eleonore Beatrice Morin. Isn't that nice? Pretty. It's like music. Eleonore Beatrice Morin. She was born in a quite poor family in a place called Sault Ste. Marie in Canada. And when she was 6 years old, her mother died in childbirth. And she, my mother, was put on a train in care of the conductor, which was a very safe thing to do then, in care of the conductor to go to Ottawa, which was a couple of 100 miles away, where she had a $5 bill pinned to her lapel, and she was picked up at the train by the nuns who ran a convent, which is, to this day, now it's the Chinese embassy in Ottawa. And when we visited it in my 20s or so, my mother pointed out, you see the windows along there? If you go up 3 stories and then count 4 windows over, that was my window. She spent 15 to 16 hours a day in her room from age 6 on. And there was a time in my life when I was in therapy and and struggling with the insecure attachment that I suffered. And I was really angry at my mother because she just was not very warm and fuzzy. And I think the therapist I think it was pointed out to me because I didn't come to it myself. It was, Robert, she did really well given that she spent from age 6 to 16 with the nuns. To survive that was quite something, actually. The day that she had her stroke, which is now her first stroke, is now about 20 years ago, and I called, and she didn't answer the phone. It was the third time I think I'd ever called, and she didn't answer the phone, because she was profoundly agoraphobic. She lived, and she had a stool in the kitchen beside the sink. And she would sit there and look out the window. She kind of controlled the street. And when I was a kid and I would bicycle in, my mother was always there. Because her position in the world was sitting by the window looking out. She never said so, but all of that generation are deceased at this point. She never said so, but her sister talked about there having been a lot of sexual abuse in that family with the uncles and so on. So when she would go back to visit her home, some yucky things happened. When she was 16, she had to leave the convent to go and take care of her father, who was a very severe alcoholic, and her two younger sisters. So she worked in a little town called Blind River. She worked in a grocery store and had a little apartment above it at 16, and supported her father and sisters. Depression. It was during the Depression. She never really got over the Depression. I know I heard my parents, it was very odd, interesting, fascinating really, to have done several years of family therapy training and then go back and listen to one's parents having the fights that one heard as a child, but to hear them from a more clinical perspective. I wasn't, of course, totally separate from the system. I'm still not today. But there really wasn't much money at first. But then by the time I graduated from high school and left, there was plenty of money. It was, lower middle class, Montreal. And in the argument, my father kept saying, "For God's sake, Eleanor, go buy some clothes. Get what you want. There's enough." But she never could hear it. Her experience was there was never enough. And the resonances of that have been, the Depression, like any major event, carries on through next generations. And in my case, the depression, the emotional depression, certainly has been a theme. It used to be a major theme, and now it's a lesser theme. It can get provoked, but it's less now, a lot, thanks to the Dharma and tons of therapy. Two siblings, two older sisters in my family. But I want to speak of her what would it be? It's beyond diligence, her devotion. I calculated one time quickly that my guess is that she planned, purchased, and cooked 15,000 or so meals for me. 15,000 times. Whew, that's a lot. That's kind of fun. Before that, of course, there were diapers and sicknesses and the incredible service that she provided to have me survive. And there were some serious challenges in the family, some sickness and lots of emotional stuff. And they, my parents, they held it together through very challenging times. They stayed together till the bitter, depressed end. It was like a dark... when my son was born, which is now 34 years ago, they came to visit one time. And I had my then mentor, therapist, the person who said, you should start doing a therapy practice based in meditation, which 42 years ago was utterly revolutionary. And I invited him and his wife for dinner, and they came for dinner, and my parents were my parents. And whenever one of them would say something that built a little self-esteem, the other one would come in and snatch it out, and then the other way. It's very, not an uncommon pattern. Anyway, the next day or a few days later when I met with him, I said, well, what did you see? And he said, are you sure you want me to say? And I said, yes. And he said, well, Robert, it looks like a kind of death dance. That they're both very depressed and they're both drinking a lot. And the only way it will end is in death. You need to give up trying to rescue either of them. And I had been sided with my mother through their struggles, and very, very codependently fused with my mother, actually. So, they really did the very best they could, as do we all. Right? Every single human being does the best they can. And when we think of exceptions to that, we need to look back at where they come from and how they've been conditioned, what their experience was. When I speak of this, I always think of Saddam Hussein, who saw people killed in his early young childhood. And when we go back and look at how people were conditioned, what their family was like, what their medical history is like, I became very interested in attachment disorder, reactive attachment disorder, a few years back when I had some stepkids who were adopted and from Central America and had very severe attachment issues. And in the research or presentation I went to was one fellow who talked about how if you were to go on death row and take in the fancy scans, you discover there's a region in the prefrontal cortex that has to do with empathy, that those, mostly guys, in there, it doesn't light up. And it doesn't light up in children unless they're loved adequately in the first year or two. Because it isn't developed. It only develops through empathic connection, through the bonding cycle, which is, well, I'm hurting. Oh, you're hurting? Let me see if I can fix it. Oh, you're hungry. Oh, let me feed you. That happens thousands of times, and the message that one gets is the world is a safe place. There is love in the world. If one doesn't get that, one cannot develop empathy, and one therefore runs afoul of the law and other people in big ways. So the best they could. And they did pretty darn well. I'm sitting here. Not what my father envisioned, of course. I was going to be an aeronautical engineer because I flew airplanes, model airplanes. Obvious, isn't it? And I failed calculus 3 times. And we went to the dean, my parents, bless their hearts. Neither of them finished high school. They had commercial training, what they called commercial training. And my dad in the end was running a company distributing magazines and paperbacks that had about 60 trucks. So he did very well for someone. He was very smart, but not very educated. What was I going to say? Lost it. A little embarrassment there. Shame. Funny. Shame. Well, whatever the case, they did the best they could. And then my mother had a very bad stroke. She was in the hospital in Montreal for a year, and very little rehab. And then my sisters and I moved them across the country. That was quite a scene. My mother on a stretcher with 9 seats. She had to be across the seats, and my father on oxygen. And quite a scene. But we moved them into a hotel, or not a hotel, a apartment in Vancouver, and my father died a month later. And on the top of his pile of papers was his instructions for after his death. So yeah, he was ready to go. Emphysema, bad emphysema. So, mother. We do mother differently than it's been done in the entire history of humanity. Mother was a collective role. Mother had friends. They all hung out together. They worked at the well together. They worked in the fields together. It was very interesting to me in my travels, way before I had children. I discovered that everywhere on the planet they have daycare. That the fantasy that came out for us in the 50s, that the best way to raise children is to have the children home with mom. That's not the way anybody does it. In the way behind Annapurna in Nepal, in Europe, in Southeast Asia, the women band together to go do whatever they have to do, and there's 1 or 2 women and a teenager with the kids. And the women are having community. We fell into a very strange belief that the nuclear family is the right way, which actually happened in order to support industry so that the family can be moved, with the fantasy that you can move a family without absolutely screwing it up. And you can pull kids out of school and stick them over here because they're parts of a machine. You know, 1 piston of the right size is as good as another piston of the same size. So we've been trying this experiment of the nuclear family in isolation, and it's been incredibly difficult for the mothers. I know complicated reasons, in the first year and a half or so of my son's life, I was the primary parent, and I stayed home. My God, taking care of an infant is full-time, exhausting, and challenging. It's also a little weird because this is a long time ago, and when I went out to join the mothers groups with small children, the welcome was not huge. It's like, what is this guy doing here? He has a child, but clearly he's not real. It was hard. It was great, too, really important for me. Humbling. So there's something really important I want to say. See if I can get to it. My own psychological and emotional journey has required a great deal of work to disentangle my identity from that of my mother. And the fusion was so great. Many years ago, I had my chart done by some disembodied, famous woman astrologer. And the first thing she said was, how old were you, do you think, when you started taking care of your mother? And I said, well, maybe a year. And she said, no, think 15 minutes. And when I left home, it was at age 20. I lived at home till I was 21. Hard to leave. And I wrote my mother 60-page letters. It's a level of fusion and Oedipal confusion that was pretty heavy. Now, of course, it's had a very positive side, because that level of paying attention to an other, when no longer codependent, becomes the capacity to really hear other people and be compassionate. So that which started as a profound psychological wound can be, as can all of our wounds, unless they're too utterly severe, can be converted through compassion and mindfulness and love into gifts. That our wound is our gift in the end. So one of the ways that in the recovering of myself, in the emergence of myself from this fusion, in my mid-20s, I did a 2-month meditation retreat in California, and I was looking at a rose, really into a rose. I'd somehow never noticed roses before. Well, of course, I was on a meditation retreat, bored to death, and it's like, a rose. But I realized that I wasn't looking at the rose for me, or simply to look at the rose. I was looking at the rose and converting it into a poem that I would send to my mother, because my task was to entertain her and save her, because she was caught in the convent behind the walls. And it was quite a jaw-dropping moment when I realized that I wasn't living fully for this person. I was living with an imperative, actually, to live for another, to help, to take care of. So, this journey of my own has been very educational, and I've had great help, great therapists and teachers. Ruth Dennison, my other mother. I didn't, when Ruth died, she'd been, her dementia had been getting worse over the last 2 or 3 years, and I had a lot of responsibility and challenge, and as she was dying, my thought was, well, it'll be a relief, and it was a relief when she passed, to not be that engaged all the time. But turned out that the loss was huge, and that I didn't function all that well for the next 3 or 4 months. It was quite remarkable to me. But, it's funny, I keep getting to the point I want to make and then going off on a tangent. What had to happen is summed up in a way that when I teach forgiveness meditation using one's parent, it's summed up in a few words, which is reflect upon that ordinary human being who in this lifetime played the role of your mother. It's not your mother, it's an ordinary person who played a role for you. An important role, crucial. But to take mother off that archetypal central place and realize that what we're dealing with, who we're dealing with, is an ordinary, flawed human being who has strengths and weaknesses and who did their best. Can be a huge relief. And to realize that they are not who we are, and we are not them. We don't have to live the life of our parents. Many of us are very afraid that we're going to do the same thing. And we also don't have to live the life which is the trajectory upon which they sent us. Right? We come out of our family of origin very heavily determined. What we like, what we don't like, who we are, what our emotional capacity is, what love is. We're kind of fired out of this cannon. And fortunately, we're strongly influenced by our peers, and the community in which we live is very important. And the more broadly we experience community and other adults and other experiences, the more the potential of our destiny is strengthened. But to some degree, we're sent out on a ballistic trajectory. This is where you're going to be. And then we're acted upon by the world, by the people that we relate to, and by the life experiences, and the ethos and the financial circumstances of the times, whether there's war or not, whether we go to war or not, whether we get pregnant very early or not. And one of the huge interventions in a human life is the Dharma. That, in my case, running into the Dharma in India, I was in my mid-20s, early 20s. And the revolution that took place in this consciousness and has continued was utter. When I first met Ruth, which is about 7 years after I'd started practice and study, our first conversation was 4 or 5 or 6 hours long. And I met someone, I met an older woman who was younger than I am now, a lot younger. I met an older woman who was very wise in terms of the Dharma. And she took an interest in me. And I took an interest in her and followed her around to retreats. And I started doing this practice of sitting and meditating. And I encountered codependency. Well, my favorite definition, I worked in drug and alcohol treatment for some years and became pretty fluent in the language. But the one definition that stuck is a codependent is a person who, when he or she falls off a cliff, someone else's life flashes before their eyes. And that's true. It's like your needs always come first. It's not what Louis Marshall Rosenberg, but very beautifully was, my needs first and foremost, but not at the expense of another. But even learning what our own needs are is a challenging, daunting task. And one of the primary ways that I discovered to do that is what we do here. We stop, we sit down, and we pay attention to what's going on. On my first retreats, the primary anguish was, my girlfriend has left me. Right? My identity is such that I only really exist when I'm in fusion. That's what I thought love was. I only really exist in fusion, and when there isn't fusion there, in fact, when the object of the fusion is off somewhere else with someone else, then what exists here is absolute desperation. Because that's the identity, the view, the belief of who I am. And somewhat what we idealize and fantasize that being in love is, being that it's about, as opposed to the pillars of the temple stand apart, and so on. Gibran. So, how many of you have a mother who is still alive? Raise your hands, please. Oh my gosh, I'm getting old. Wow. How many have a father who's alive? Huh. Wow. Well, my parents have been gone for almost 20 years. It's like a different lifetime. And, oh, I just had a moment of jealousy. Interesting. Wishing. I am of the nature to sicken, age, and die. Right? Great reference, not refuge, just recollections from the Buddha. If you, those of you that have parents still, if you survive, they will die before your eyes. You will get the phone call that happened, or you will be there. Maybe I got to be there with my mom. But you may well have life post-parents. And then we will all die, and our children will lose their parents. And this is not a surprise. This is the way it is. This is normal life. This is life. If it gets born, it dies. So there's something a little small, contracted, about the reification of the archetype my mother. That she was absolutely essential, and I do believe in honoring our parents, but there's something about moving beyond the identification and I am a child. There are no children in this room. This is a room full of adults. And to the degree that we are projecting on a person something that results in us feeling not empowered, that's a delusion. I would say that no one in this room has a mother. You have a person who in this lifetime played the role of your mother to the best of her ability, no matter what happened. I just had a Disney-esque 3 little birds kind of singing over here. Anicca dukkha anatta, anicca dukkha anatta. All things are impermanent. Anicca. Sitting in meditation and breathing exemplifies impermanence. And to sit in meditation and observe impermanence occurring, and to observe it and observe it and observe it, and observe a thought arises and a sound arises and this morning arises, and to take our focus and to really attend to the fact that everything's arising and passing away, that undermines the identification with this as being a separate person, solid, as well as that other. Today's reflection, the mother. That there's that, and dukkha, unsatisfactoriness. All mothers are unsatisfactory. All mothers fail badly. Fortunately, it was a Winnicott. It's quite possible to have good enough mothering. And it actually is not, that attachment theory. If the mother's fairly attentive, she can provide enough for the child to develop well. But all of our mothers made big mistakes. And of course, they can also make mistakes because of the ethos of the time. Who was that? The don't feed the baby at night, feed the baby on a schedule, that violent thing. That's what everybody thought, right? Well, it's science, and that's what the doctors are telling us, so don't do it. Meanwhile, we have a generation of kids who are having attachment wounding because of this theory. Crazy theories go through the culture. My first wife and I was in the 70s, and we somehow got the notion, and we were supported, there were books about it even, that it was really okay to just have knockdown, drag-em-out fights and throw in a little wine while you're at it, because it was important to get it all out there. What? We did great damage to each other. Oh, in the book Open Marriage, fortunately we didn't go on that one, but yikes. The couple that wrote the book Open Marriage, 15 or 20 years later, they wrote another book saying, oops, we were wrong. Yikes. So, back to anicca, dukkha, anatta. When that in oneself, when the meditation is revealing more and more thoughts thinking themselves, emotions coming and going, opinions forming, reactions to people and things coming and going, and we realize how utterly impersonal they are. And it starts to soften the identification with one's neurotic process, for one thing. Then this person who played the role of mother, we also can give more slack to, because we realize we're not dealing with my mother, we're dealing with the universe that has taken form for a brief few eye blinks and is posed as this person and then moves on. Is this making sense? Are you connecting with this? The connection with the Dharma? It's such a relief. There's that pattern that was part of my process for a long time. I went through blaming my mother for a long time, a year or two at least. Fortunately, I had a therapist who saw it as a stage, but it was an important stage. Little Bobby was angry at mommy, and fortunately, I don't know whether I figured this out myself, but maybe the therapist helped me. I try to help people with this, which is when you're going through the raging at your parent stage, don't make much contact. because you may do real harm, right? The person of today isn't the person who neglected you, likely. They're a different person than the person who was so absent in the first 5 years or 10 years or whatever. And whatever the case, your rage is your responsibility. That's no way to communicate with any human being. It doesn't help. And then, fortunately, that's a phase. And the Dharma helps us tremendously in that, because in the midst of the rage, right, one has regressed and one is full of rage, awareness is absolutely unmoved and present. There's no reason to not be hyper-conscious. There's no reason, doesn't need the word hyper. There's no reason to not be completely awake and watch the personality rage. Because we're not the personality. Just like there's no reason not to be wide awake and watch jealousy or fear or lust or despair. Because that's not who we are. We are not fundamentally the personality. I mean, that was the Buddha's huge discovery, that awareness is possible. I mean, what's he called? The awakened one. A Buddha means one who's awake, who's awakened from identification with the dream. Achan Sumedho just walked in. Hi there, Achan. Love. Love means, and metta. What does metta mean? It means there's room for everything. There's room in this vast field of awareness for the anger / hatred / whatever's there about the parent or others. So love means there's room for everything, including, don't forget the other side, Robert, including tremendous gratitude and appreciation and respect and admiration. And there's room for all of that. But love does not mean that we have to spend time with someone. As Sumedho put it, you can love someone very fully while you call the police. Or you can love someone profoundly when you say, I'm not going to relate to you anymore and this relationship is over. Because love doesn't have to do with this, it has to do with keeping the heart open. So to learn to love a parent and to have clear boundaries and to say, I won't talk about my sibling anymore with you, or is very loving, or can be. And it's profoundly potentiated by remembering that this is the person who in this lifetime played this role. Who came in as a little who came in as a sperm and an egg. And then got born, and then went through somebody training and had all the somebody training experiences, and then they took on the role of being a parent. Both of my kids have found reason to go to therapy. With me as the parent. What does a parent do whose parents are too distant? Tries to be close all the time. I mustn't tell stories about my kids, but it's there's no free ride. One way or another, we provide our children with some good grist for the mill to keep the next generation of therapists in business. It's just par for the course. So I want to say one more thing about this, which is if your mother's still alive and your relationship is such that it really makes sense that you connect with her today, then by all means connect with her. But remember that you're not dealing with your mother. You're dealing with an ordinary, flawed human being who passed you through, who did that incredible gift of giving you a body and then took care of you in your utter vulnerability. And have mercy on her because, of course, she was limited. Not only because it's the way it is, no one can be her, Kuan Yin, and also all of our mothers, or at least I presume most of our mothers, were living in a culture which emphasized the nuclear family, and not that the extended family of traditional culture is all sweetness and light either, because sometimes it's very difficult to even move out of the house or to have a life of your own. So there's dukkha no matter what. So I think I'd like to try an experiment. I want to pass around the microphone, and when it comes to you, if you wish, please say the name of the person who in this lifetime played the role of mother. And I'm going to say a few things as it goes. Would you take it? Are we? It's early, is it not?
Seems early. I don't know what's going on.
Maybe. Hang on. Let me see. It's like what? It's a revolution. It's like walking to the door where they release the bucking something. You kids are here kind of early. Are you ready to come in? Could we have another maybe 5 or 7 minutes, do you think? Sorry, you can all just go back to being tied up back there. They're so cheerful. So let's try that a little bit anyway. Just say the name, thinking of this person who in this lifetime played the role of mother, and just say her name.
Elizabeth Walker Dalton.
And holding her in love. Pass it on, Jim.
Ai Guang Xiao.
Madeline Midgehall.
Marjorie Evelyn Weiss.
Shirley Doris Frew.
Margaret Evelyn Cox.
Patricia Ruth Payton.
Shirley Nita Helkemeyer-Beyer.
Sheila Elaine Smith. Ellen Joyce and Lila Diane.
Denise Brown.
Nadine Murray Hine.
Hema Ananta.
You don't, of course, if it comes to you, you don't have to say anything. You just pass it on if you want.
Corin Hawk Hamilton.
Alice Chavez.
Phyllis Anna Spencer.
Rita Mary McConnell.
Susan May Nickel.
Anne Greenfield.
Judy Boersma.
Darlene Murray Beck.
Elizabeth Louise Glavin Feist Caldwell.
Ruth McLean Radford.
Ruth Lillian White.
Laura Stadler.
Elizabeth Richard Burton.
Norma Jean Anderson.
Hiroko Yamamoto.
Dorotea Parras.
Stephanie Cortana Gardner.
Mary Helen McLaurin.
Clemmy Ruth Walker.
Corky Crystal.
Barbara Ann Brannigan.
Connie Jane Fisher.
Padma Kumari Shandas.
Balamani Tamburati.
Shirley Jane Willie.
Michelle Shepard Smansky.
And Evans Miller.
Nancy Ann Croyle.
Caroline Levy.
Harriet Teresa Sullivan.
Phyllis Lambert.
Please raise your hand if it hasn't come your way over the far side. To the right. Yeah.
Fern Koenig.
Teresa Ong.
Beverly Elaine Petlin.
Elizabeth Tracy Britt. Donna Marie Dow.
Genevieve Alameda Williams.
Maria Roman.
Kate Borton.
Blanche Marie.
Anybody missed who wishes to? Great. Would you just push? Oh, actually, I'll need that for the. Can you bring it up? If your thank you. If your life process with your parent, your mother in this case, is still in some turmoil or struggle, I highly encourage the book Forgive for Good. Marvelous book for that process of forgiveness. And forgiveness doesn't mean forgive and forget. Forgiveness means forgive and remember, but to learn how to live in the present moment fully with your heart open. And it's possible. I've seen hundreds of people over the years through the Dharma and applying themselves find their way out of what they thought was hopeless circumstances to realize that the other person doesn't have to change at all. And history doesn't have to change at all, which is, of course, a good thing. That what changes is the position of one's heart, the stance one has inside, which is a movement to compassion, which is realizing we're all just doing the best we can given the circumstances we're in and the conditioning we come from. So it's not it's a really very functional, practical book. So Forgive for Good, if you if that work would be beneficial for you. Well, thank you for listening, for being here today. We are so remarkably fortunate to have the Dharma and this place and our health. So, shall we open the gate? And I think the rider has to stay on for 10 seconds till the horn goes to get full points. Thank you to those of you who joined us on the internet today. Hope you have a fine day. Oops, do you want that one? I was going to sit on it. Oh, you bring it closer. Nice. Yay. I have to stick my leg out here because it's injured. There we go. Well, may I hold your hands? There we go. Oh, I forgot this piece. Would all the mommies in the room please raise your hand? Everyone who's brought a child into the world. Thank you for your diligence and bravery. All right. So let us give the hand on the left a little squeeze. And what would you wish for that person? A lifetime of being awake, much love, compassion. What would it be for you? And to the hand on your right, giving it a little squeeze or a push, a stroke. Remembering, of course, that what we wish for another, we are wishing for ourselves because of our unity of being. And now around our circle, hand to hand and heart to heart. We're all in this soup together. And do we have someone to sing? So whenever you're ready, you know the words.
May all beings be happy. May all beings be happy. May all beings be happy. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Thank you. And now, the ancient ritual. Please don't knock over the table. On the count of 3, where everyone in the room gets to take a deep breath, and we will blow the candle. 1, 2, 3, blow. Yes. So please join us. Please also greet the person to your left and right and join us for coffee and tea and goodies. And see you soon.